You're listening to Dr. Amy Dayries. That's me. I'm a dentist in Roswell, Georgia, and you're listening to the Whole Healing Radio Show. I'm so excited to announce my guest tonight. I'm really thrilled. He is a professor, a teacher, an inventor, and a scientist, Dr. Nathan Bryan, and he is a graduate of LSU, Louisiana State University School of Medicine in Shreveport, where he earned a PhD in physiology after an undergrad in biochemistry at the University of Texas at Austin. For the last 19 years, Dr. Nathan Bryan has been doing research on nitric oxide, and he has invented some products out there, but really is primarily a lecturer and teacher on the positive effects of how you can really reverse and better your health through being aware about the nitric oxide pathway and how you can integrate that or intake more or create more nitric oxide in your body for better health. And before Dr. Bryan comes on, I wanted to utilize one of his informative videos. It's a 1-minute sort of infomercial, about 6 minutes. Okay, well, we'll do it in just a minute, but without further ado, Dr. Nathan Bryan, thank you for coming on. You're lecturing at the A4M conference this weekend. That's the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. So you are out there teaching a lot of our colleagues in the healthcare about the nitric oxide pathway.
That's correct. So this is, I think, I've been speaking at these A4Ms and lecturing since 2011, every spring and every winter at these events. So it's 6,000 or 7,000 physicians who hopefully can provide them something new they can take back to their practice on Monday morning. That's
great. Well, I heard first about the nitric oxide pathway only about 2.5 years ago. I was taking a class with Dr. Mark Houston. He's a cardiologist out of Vanderbilt University School of Medicine, and he was talking about the use of nitric oxide or how nitric oxide is affected in not so great a way by the use of oral mouthwashes. And I said, what? I've never heard of this before. And it was a whole new paradigm shift really for me and how I practice dentistry. And it's something I'm trying to share with the dental community, but also the public at large.
Yeah, so Mark Houston's a good friend and colleague, and he does a great job. And as a cardiologist, teaches people about endothelial dysfunction and nitric oxide. In fact, he's conducted many of the clinical trials on our technology. But yeah, he does a great job. In fact, we can discuss it later, but I think we figured out the oral systemic link. We know that people with periodontal disease, gingivitis, have a higher incidence of heart attack and stroke, and we may understand why now.
Well, can we talk a little bit about that? Can we start with the mouthwash part, maybe, of nitric oxide?
Sure. So for years, people thought that, this increased inflammation in the gums and, in the oral cavity was causing systemic inflammation. Mm-hmm. And I think that's still an important piece of the puzzle. But what we're finding is, so there's two components here. Number one is the people that have periodontal disease are typically told by their dentist to use mouthwash to kill these gingival plaque that are causing the inflammation and the gum disease. Well, indiscriminately, the antiseptics are killing the good bacteria. And so we've identified some non-pathogenic commensal oral bacteria that are basically providing the human body with a source of nitric oxide. So when you use mouthwash, you kill about 50% of the body's ability to generate nitric oxide. Mm-hmm. And nitric oxide is one of these molecules that's cardioprotective. It maintains normal blood pressure. It maintains clean lining of the blood vessel to where plaque and fat doesn't deposit and accumulate, and so when you lose the ability to make nitric oxide, you get advanced cardiovascular disease. But that's one side of the story. The other side of the story is that there's a lot of bacteria in the mouth, and they're all competing for limited resources. And when you've got some pathogens such as the gingival bacteria that are causing the plaque and the gum disease, mm-hmm. they're basically out competing the good bacteria that are generating nitric oxide. So the whole point is that focusing on the oral microbiome and oral health is probably one of the most important things you can do for maintaining cardiovascular health.
That's the coolest thing to me.
Well, dentists, I think it's for you. I mean, dentists really become probably the most important person in primary care and healthcare. So a dentist can really save your life or really set the bar against you in affecting your systemic health. So I think it's very important that dentists understand the role of the oral microbiome, how the oral health, oral hygiene affects systemic health, and then, really take some steps to not do the things that they were taught in dental school that are affecting, the so-called standard of care that's probably not doing your patients any benefit. And this is an evolution of science, and it's how knowledge is disseminated. It's how discoveries are made, and we have to pivot and change sometimes. What we thought were facts 50 years ago are no longer valid.
Right. You have to be open to the new research and understand the science, why we have these paradigms, and then be willing to make a shift when it doesn't make sense anymore. So
right.
this nitric oxide pathway, I believe it won the Nobel Prize for Medicine just a few years back, maybe about 15, not more than 15 years ago, I believe. Is that correct?
Well, it was in 1998.
1998.
Years,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, time's flying. So
right.
21 years ago, and you've been working on this for 19 years.
That's right, since 2000.
And the pathway starts when you have nitrates in food, like green leafy vegetables. You eat that, and your mouth converts the nitrates to nitrites because of the bacteria in your mouth.
That's right.
And then that gets converted. I'll let you go on.
So in order to utilize nutrients from diet, the bacteria are there to do things that we as humans can't do, or that we haven't yet evolved to do. And so humans don't have a nitrate reductase gene or the capacity to reduce nitrates. So we're 100% dependent upon oral bacteria. And so you can do all the things that you're told to do, eat a high vegetable diet, in fact, a vegetarian diet.
Mm-hmm.
But if you use a mouthwash once or twice a day to eradicate the bacteria that are responsible for metabolizing nitrate into nitrite, nitric oxide, you're not getting any cardioprotective benefits of your vegetables. So if you have the right bacteria, then you increase nitrite in your saliva. And then when you swallow your own saliva, provided you can make stomach acid,
right,
then this generates nitric oxide in the lumen of the stomach. But then we have another problem. People use antacids. People use proton pump inhibitors, and you shut down stomach acid production, which is now shown to inhibit nitric oxide production. And there's data showing that people who use proton pump inhibitors, things like omeprazole and Protonix, Prilosec, drugs like that, if you've been on those for 3 to 5 years, you have a 35% higher incidence of heart attack and stroke. So this is no longer a trivial matter.
Mm-hmm.
And these drugs were never approved for chronic use. They were approved for acute use for gastric reflux. Yeah. So again, there's things that we do that have become the standard of care that disrupt nitric oxide production, that people unknowingly do, that puts them at risk for the number one killer of men and women worldwide, which is heart disease. And so it's really very simple. If we stop doing the things that interrupt nitric oxide production, and we implement some strategies to restore nitric oxide production, it's really very simple. But it's lack of knowledge. That's why I'm here.
Thank you for coming on. It's really hugely important. I know that when I was taking this class a couple of years ago, we were learning there's at least 7 major things that nitric oxide does for your body. And I'm going to rattle them off. It's the most powerful vasodilator present in the body. So it's going to really greatly increase circulation to everything. It prevents adhesions to the endothelium and platelet aggregation. So it's going to stop that atherosclerosis, that hardening of the arteries. It plays a major role in remodeling and healing blood vessels. It causes or helps with renal vasodilation, or in other words, kidney health, diuresis, and salt uresis. So an appropriate balance of salts with the kidneys. It controls T cell immune response and influences inflammation. It downgrades inflammation because it helps build a healthy immune response when there's something going on. It prevents oxidizing LDL, which some people refer to as bad cholesterol. I don't like that term, but so it creates a better ratio of cholesterol, and it promotes apoptosis, or appropriate cell death. So if you, there have been studies, I believe, with nitric oxide in cancer research, because cancer cells grow at a much greater rate in a lot of cases than a healthy human cell. So you want apoptosis sometimes.
Absolutely. So you can, I haven't seen that list. I like that list. That's certainly a top 7, but there's many more functions. But I think the important point is that if you lose the ability to generate nitric oxide in the human body, there are a lot of things that go wrong. You get chronic inflammation, you get high blood pressure, you get kidney disease. Everything you mentioned happens And so we have to prevent the loss of nitric oxide production, and we have to do things to support nitric oxide production.
That makes sense. That makes sense to me. And so something else I want to get into a little later on in the show, maybe we start on it now. There are these gene SNP pathways that we have found from human microbiome research that's been done also in the last number of years in medicine. And so we know that some people have a predilection where they make nitric oxide more easily than other people.
Yeah, it's a big, obviously the Human Genome Project has been mapped out, so we know specific gene deletions or these single nucleotide polymorphisms that, if people have one defective copy or two defective copies, then that gene product or protein becomes dysfunctional. So obviously, if you have a SNP in eNOS, the endothelial nitric oxide synthase enzyme, that protein product or that gene product, the protein becomes dysfunctional, and you obviously become nitric oxide deficient. So that's obvious. What's not obvious and apparent is the MTHFR, the methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase gene. And this is very common in the US. I've seen statistics that 45 to 50% of Americans have an MTHFR SNP. And so it's a methylation problem, obviously. But what people don't realize is that basically feeds into the nitric oxide pathway because, as you know, these are kind of cogs in a wheel. And if one doesn't work, then, this supply of substrate doesn't feed into the downstream pathway. So MTHFR reduces biopterin to tetrahydrobiopterin, and it's really complex biochemistry. But the point is that if you have an MTHFR SNP, you are by definition nitric oxide deficient because you don't have tetrahydrobiopterin, and that's the rate-limiting step in nitric oxide production. And it completely explains the symptoms that most physicians or clinicians don't really recognize that it's a nitric oxide problem. They think it's all related to methylation disorders.
Yes.
That's a lot of the problem, but a lot of the symptoms can be explained by a loss of nitric oxide.
And then you can have offshoots of that pathway, which would be like going back to high school biology for people out there who aren't science people. The Krebs cycle, you can't make as much ATP or energy when you can't crank this nitric oxide pathway.
That's right. So you get mitochondrial dysfunction, and every single chronic disease has mitochondrial dysfunction. So again, that's the last thing you want. You want efficient mitochondria. You want a high number of mitochondria that are generating ATP or cellular energy more efficiently with less oxygen. Then you become a very efficient human machine.
Dr. Brian has created a 6-minute short sort of video we're going to play now, and then we'll be talking more about it. So here we go.
In a young, healthy person, they have good blood flow, good circulation. There's no plaque built up. The arteries are flexible and pliable, not rigid or stiff. The heart functions normally. But as people age, nitric oxide production decreases, and the consequences are severe. Arteries become stiffer, more narrow, constricted, and plaque builds up. Circulation and blood flow decreases, limiting oxygen and nutrient delivery to every cell in the body. Blood pressure and fatigue increase. Sexual function decreases. Normal stem cell functions are lost. Inflammation increases. Cognition and memory decreases, increasing the risk of Alzheimer's. Basically, every function in the body works less efficiently. But technology exists to reverse these effects, to restore and repair normal nitric oxide production, and provide the best outcome as you age. By choosing to restore nitric oxide production, arteries become healthier. Plaque in the lining of the blood vessel is removed. Your circulation improves. Heart function improves. Blood pressure normalizes. Sexual function improves. Normal stem cell functions are restored. Cognitive abilities improve. Everything works better. In order to restore and fix the underlying problem of nitric oxide deficiency, you must first understand how the body makes nitric oxide. There's two ways the body makes nitric oxide. One is through the utilization of L-arginine through the enzyme nitric oxide synthase. But the older we get, and based on lifestyle conditions, this enzyme becomes dysfunctional. So over time, we make less nitric oxide through the nitric oxide synthase enzyme. And in this case, giving more L-arginine does not create more nitric oxide. The other pathway is dependent upon diet and the conversion of nitrate to nitrite to nitric oxide. In the mouth, nitrate is converted to nitrite by natural good bacteria. When saliva is swallowed, the acid in your stomach converts nitrite to nitric oxide. However, when people use medications like antacids, the nitrite to nitric oxide conversion is completely shut down. And when people use mouthwash, antiseptics, and antibiotics, the bacteria is killed, shutting down the nitrate to nitrite conversion. Proton pump inhibitors shut down this conversion too, but they also decrease nitric oxide production from the nitric oxide synthase enzyme through L-arginine by the production of an inhibitor called ADMA. In other words, in addition to the natural decreases that your body would see as you age, most of the people in America have this pathway of nitric oxide production completely shut down. So the challenge has always been, how do you fix the nitric oxide problem? If your body can't make nitric oxide, you need product technology to do it for you. And you need to restore and repair the ability to make nitric oxide naturally in the body. There is technology to fix the dysfunctional nitric oxide synthase enzyme. In fact, it recouples the enzyme and makes the body's ability to generate nitric oxide in the lining of the blood vessel better from L-arginine. You need product technology to restore steady-state concentrations of nitrite and the ability to produce nitric oxide from nitrite that's independent from stomach acid production. In short, you can overcome the loss of nitric oxide production with age and the use of antiseptics, mouthwash, antibiotics, proton pump inhibitors, and other lifestyle choices that shut down nitric oxide production. Nitrate products such as beetroot or green food supplements typically don't work. Most people lack the bacteria and the functional pathway to create nitric oxide from nitrate. L-arginine products don't work because without fixing how the enzyme couples, more L-arginine won't create more nitric oxide. It will create more oxidative stress with even further consequences, reducing nitric oxide production, causing further damage to the body. It's important to understand how the body makes nitric oxide and how lifestyle, daily practices, and drug therapy can interrupt nitric oxide production and put your body at risk for the many diseases characterized by the loss of nitric oxide. After all, how can you correct something if you don't know the cause? By eliminating practices that disrupt nitric oxide production and/or using products that have been shown in clinical trials to restore nitric oxide production, you can help ensure your body has what it needs to generate this critical molecule. Nitric oxide biochemistry is complex, even for experts in the field. With nearly 2 decades of research, hundreds of publications, I know nitric oxide. We, the scientific community, know how the body makes it. We know what goes wrong in people that can't make nitric oxide, and most importantly, we now know how to fix the underlying problems and restore nitric oxide production. Once you fix these nitric oxide production pathways, it leads to better cardiovascular health. And once you restore the delivery of oxygen and nutrients to all cells in the body, everything works better. Literally everything.
Well, thank you, Dr. Nathan Bryan. That was a really amazing infographic. Really wonderful graphics. It really brings to life what's going on inside of our physiology all the time.
Thank you. We put a lot of time and effort into that because what I've learned over these really 15 years, I give 40 or 50 lectures a year, and people typically don't remember my lectures or they forget because it's complex. And so really my objective with that is to create a 6-minute teaching video that you can watch over and over again and really take some complex science and distill it down into a simple message that's really, in my opinion, very important for your own health and well-being.
It's very powerful. If anyone out there just saw that and they would like to watch it again or share it with their friends and loved ones, please go to www.nathansbryan, and Bryan is BRYAN.com.
It's drnathansbryan.com. drnathansbryan.com.
drnathansbryan.com. And so you mentioned in the video there that Well, first of all, let's just re-break it down again. There's two ways that you can make nitric oxide, but after about the age of 40, one of those pathways really sort of shuts down, and that's that L-arginine pathway.
Yeah, so we look at the function of the enzyme called eNOS, and that's the enzyme in the lining of the blood vessels. So we lose about 10 to 12% of that function per decade. So by the time you're 40 years old, you only have about 50% of nitric oxide you had when you were younger. So there's this age-related decline in endothelial nitric oxide production. Mm-hmm. But then the other one comes from the diet, and we know we need about 300 to 400 milligrams of nitrate per day to generate nitric oxide. The Western diet, or the standard American diet, the SAD diet, if you will,
right,
you're only getting about 100 to 150 milligrams. So just like most people are deficient in magnesium or selenium or chromium or vitamin D, people are deficient in nitrate. And you compound that with the number of people that use mouthwash, which is about 200 million Americans every day, not to count the people that are on prescription antibiotics, which is another several hundred million. The human body cannot make nitric oxide because of what we do or what we don't do.
And that may be very well why we have such a history of heart disease being our number one killer, and so many of these chronic inflammatory kinds of diseases being so prevalent.
You're spot on. And to me, that's unacceptable. Heart disease should not be the number one killer of men and women worldwide. To me, that's simply unacceptable, because we know without a doubt, unequivocally, what causes this, and it's loss of nitric oxide. And we're learning what disrupts nitric oxide production. It's certain drug therapy, it's diet, it's lifestyle. It's very simple things that every person listening to this, every person on earth can make a simple change and prevent this loss of nitric oxide. So the cardiovascular disease should be like polio. Mm-hmm. You should not die from cardiovascular disease, because we know we have the technology to diagnose it. We know what goes wrong in people that can't make it, and we have technology to fix it.
That's powerful. That's amazing. That's really the coolest thing. If we could just get this information out to lots and lots of people out there. So certain medications also affect it. So let's talk about the mouthwash again. I read a study that Duke University had a part in, and for up to 6 hours after a mouthwash exposure in the mouth, your ability to make nitric oxide was hampered. And you have to constantly make this because it's a gas. You can't store it very well.
That's right. Yeah, I think it's an important point to make, that once your body produces nitric oxide, it's gone in less than a second. So you produce it, it does its job, and then it's gone. So you have to continually regenerate and produce nitric oxide to maintain normal physiology. We just published a paper probably 2 weeks ago showing that 1 week on mouthwash, in one patient, his blood pressure went up 26 millimeters of mercury.
Wow.
So 50% of the people that are on antihypertensive medications don't have normal blood pressure. And so, 2 out of 3 people in the US, which is 300 or 400 million people, have an elevation in blood pressure. Mm-hmm. So it's not always a renin-angiotensin problem that can be targeted toward drug therapy. It's not a fluid imbalance that can be treated with diuretics. It's not ARBs and angiotensin ACE inhibitors won't affect it. It may be a dietary problem, and it may be an oral dysbiosis. So no wonder 50% of the people that are prescribed antihypertensives don't respond to the medication.
Yes.
It's the wrong target.
Yes. And then you compound that with all the millions of people on the prescriptions for proton pump inhibitors because they have acid reflux. Maybe because they're on that standard American diet as well, which has a lot of acidic foods. And a lot of them, it's not that they don't make, not that they make too much stomach acid, they don't make enough.
That's right. It's a paradox. Acid reflux is due to insufficient stomach acid, because you need stomach acid to break down proteins into amino acids. If you don't have stomach acid, you can't break down protein. You get undigested peptide fragments that are absorbed across the lining of the gut. It causes autoimmunity. It's a serious problem. If you can't make stomach acid, you're going to have serious health problems. And look at America today.
Yeah. We don't age very well. A lot of us.
No, but it's really simple. People forget, physicians and clinicians forget how the body works. And so the human body is much smarter than we are. If we give the body what it needs and if we give the body what it needs, it heals itself. If we eliminate the things that are preventing the body from healing itself, it heals itself. So if we get out of the way and give the body what it needs and stop doing things that disrupt, we're self-healing. It's very simple, at least in my mind.
I think so too. How can you increase your ability to make nitric oxide yourself, because it has so many health benefits, and who should maybe really get on that right away because they have health issues?
Well, my message is always one of prevention, because it's easier to prevent disease than it is to treat disease. And it's clear from the scientific literature, with 160,000 papers published, that loss of nitric oxide is the earliest event in the onset and progression of most, if not all, chronic diseases. In fact, the loss of production of nitric oxide precedes the structural changes that occur in the lining of the blood vessels by many years, sometimes decades.
Wow.
So you have to prevent the loss of nitric oxide. So the question is, how do you do that? Number one, you have to maintain some physical activity, because sheer stress, when you begin to exercise in the lining of the blood vessel, you need an increase in blood flow.
Okay.
And so early on, that creates sheer stress, and sheer stress activates nitric oxide production, because it's your body telling you, oh, I'm about to need some more blood flow to these working skeletal muscles, and I'm going to need more oxygen because I'm working. So the only way to do that is to dilate the blood vessels. The only way to do that is to generate nitric oxide.
Okay.
So moderate physical exercise is a very potent activator stimulus for nitric oxide production. And then number two, you have to eat the right diet. So you need 300 to 400 milligrams of nitrate. 5% of that's converted into nitrite into nitric oxide. So, but if you're not eating enough green leafy vegetables, or if you're using mouthwash that disrupts the metabolism of nitrate, or if you're taking proton pump inhibitors, you have to stop and then modify your diet. But here's the other challenge, and we published this in collaboration with Texas A&M maybe 5 or 6 years ago, because the fundamental question to us was, if we wanted to use diet as a first-line therapy for high blood pressure or to increase performance, number of Olympic athletes, it's the difference, 1% improvement is the difference between first and last. Okay. So how many beets would you need to eat, or how much broccoli or celery or spinach would you need to consume to, if you're an older individual with high blood pressure, to lower your blood pressure, or if you're a well-trained athlete, how much of this would you need to consume to improve your performance by 1%?
By only 1%.
But only 1% is all you need for a well-trained athlete. So we went around to Chicago, Los Angeles, Raleigh, Dallas, and New York. And we went to the same retail grocer and we bought the vegetable off the shelf. I think we tested 5 or 6 vegetables. We brought it back to the lab and we quantified the amount of nitrate in that vegetable.
Wow.
And there was as much as 500-fold difference in the nitrate of celery bought in Dallas and Chicago, or Dallas and Los Angeles, as there was in Chicago or New York. Wow. So for example, if you lived in Dallas, you could eat about 6 or 7 stalks of celery and get enough nitrate to lower your blood pressure or to improve performance. If you lived in New York, you'd have to eat 67 stalks of celery.
Oh my gosh.
So there's no way we could make dietary recommendations to say, oh, you need 3 servings of broccoli, you need 6 servings of celery, or whatever, because there's regional difference. It depends on where you live.
Interesting.
And those are conventionally grown vegetables. So we also compared it to organically grown vegetables. So everybody wants to eat organic because it's good for you.
Right.
Well, it's good in the fact that you're not getting some herbicides and pesticides, but organically grown vegetables have 10 times on average less nitrate than conventionally grown.
Why is that? Is it the fertilizer?
Well, because it's the fertilizer, yeah. Right. So you get nitrogen and nitrate from nitrate-based fertilizers.
Okay.
In many organic regulations, number one, you can't add herbicides or pesticides, but they limit the amount of nitrogen-based fertilizers, and you want organic manure-based fertilizers, and the variability in that is much higher. So organic is good, but it gets back to this point that we become nitrate deficient. So the whole point is, you can try to do everything you're supposed to do in eating vegetables, but perhaps you live in New York where the vegetables don't contain a high amount of nitrate, so you can never consume enough vegetables to get enough nitrate to lower blood pressure. Plus, you could be a strict vegetarian, but if you use mouthwash, you're going to get no benefit from it.
Yes.
Or if you use an antacid, you're going to get no benefit from it.
Okay.
So the challenge has always been, how do you fix this in people that have developed either hygienic practices that they don't want to get rid of? Most Americans bathe at least once or twice a day. They rid the bacteria. Most people who live in an urban environment never get out and get exposed to these ammonia oxidizing bacteria. So we talk about nitrate reducing bacteria in the mouth. There are also ammonia oxidizing bacteria that live on the skin.
Okay.
That oxidize the ammonia that we excrete when we sweat to nitric oxide.
Interesting.
So if we're using antiseptic soaps, antibacterial soaps, and washing these bacteria off every day, sometimes twice a day, then we developed a lot of dermatitis. We developed fungal infections. We're disrupting the body's homeostasis. And the best example of this is I live in rural Texas. I live on a ranch, and so I'm in the dirt, exposed to dirt. My kids are in the dirt. But we have horses and cows and dogs, and so if you bathe a horse or a dog, what's the first thing they do? They roll in the sand.
Yes.
Because you've just basically cleaned off all the good bacteria on their skin, so it's instinctive for them to go re-inoculate themselves.
Interesting.
It's part of their homeostasis. So nature teaches us a lot. We just don't always pay attention.
That's true. Oh, that's really thought-provoking for me.
Yeah, so our challenge has always been, we have an epidemic of nitric oxide deficiency. It's obvious in the incidence of type 2 diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, strokes, you name it. Every single chronic disease that plagues America today is related to deficiency in nitric oxide production.
Yes.
And it's multifactorial. It's people have genetic predispositions because of these SNPs. People have lifestyle disorders. They're physically inactive. They're sedentary. They don't eat the right foods. So it's self-inflicted. So how do you overcome that challenge and create nitric oxide for these people who cannot or unwilling to do the things to do it? That's been the focus of my research for the past 20 years is you don't need drug therapy. You don't need a pill if people do what they're supposed to do. The problem is Americans, for the most part, are lazy. They want to pop a pill and not do what they're supposed to do because of lack of discipline.
That's true.
That's what we focused on. So we understand how the body makes nitric oxide. We understand what goes wrong in people that can't make it. We know the clinical consequences. And the results of my research over the past 20 years, which is now, I think, 18. I just got a new patent issued yesterday. I think I have 18 or 19 issued patents. We have the technology to fix this. And so this technology does two things. Number one, if your body can't make nitric oxide, then we have to do it for you. And we do this in the form of a lozenge or a technology through some nutritional products we've developed. But number two, we fix the enzyme that makes nitric oxide.
Okay.
So we basically improve the body's own ability to make nitric oxide. And so that's very important because now you've got a product technology that works in every single person. We're not dependent upon the bacteria because every single person has a different oral microbiome. So you don't want to be dependent upon bacteria. And if you're using mouthwash and you don't want to stop, well, that's a personal choice. But my objective is I need to be able to generate nitric oxide in that person. If you're taking antacids because reflux disease is very uncomfortable and most people can't deal with it and they have to take an antacid, I have to be able to generate nitric oxide in that person. That's been the focus of what we've done, and that's the basis for my innovation, my patents, my research, and kind of the product technology that we've brought to market over the past 10 years.
That's fascinating. Well, I'd like to ask you some more questions about what you've been talking about. So there's a connection with L-arginine. Why would a lot of the L-arginine products out there on the market not be particularly effective? Can you re-explain that?
Sure. So there was a lot of nitric oxide-based products in the nutrition dietary supplement space that really started after the Nobel Prize was awarded in the late 90s. So arginine is a substrate or a precursor to make nitric oxide, but it has to be converted to nitric oxide by an enzyme called nitric oxide synthase.
Yeah.
And number two, L-arginine is never the rate-limiting step in nitric oxide production. Humans are never deficient in L-arginine.
Okay.
In fact, you have about 200 times more L-arginine, even in sick people, that's needed to bind the enzyme that makes nitric oxide. So we're never deficient in L-arginine. So it never made sense to me if you're deficient in nitric oxide, why are you taking L-arginine? L-arginine is not the problem. Okay. It's like putting gas in a car with a blown-up engine. You're not out of gas. Your engine's blown up. You got to fix the engine.
Okay.
And so arginine doesn't fix the engine. In fact, if you give L-arginine to a patient with endothelial dysfunction or a dysfunctional NOS enzyme, that enzyme generates superoxide instead of nitric oxide.
Okay.
So you basically exacerbate the condition you're trying to fix. So arginine's never been the solution.
All right.
Just it's basic biochemistry and basic enzymology. It's not
Sure.
the problem. And the other thing, and we published this in Nature Medicine in 2010, the cell does not use arginine that comes from extracellular pools. The cell uses arginine that comes from citrulline.
Let's talk about citrulline. Yeah, I wanted to talk about that too.
So there's a partial urea cycle that's in every cell. It's not just found in the liver, the kidneys, but in every cell. And the eNOS enzyme is part of this partial urea cycle. And so arginine comes in through the cell and gets caught up in the partial urea cycle. And there's two enzymes. This may be way too technical for your audience, but there's an enzyme called arginosuccinate lyase and arginosuccinate synthase. And this converts arginine to citrulline, or citrulline to arginine. And it's the arginine that comes from citrulline that goes to make nitric oxide.
And citrulline's in watermelon for those of you out there who aren't science buffs.
That's right. And then as a byproduct of nitric oxide production, you get citrulline produced.
Yes.
So there's this beautiful, exquisite intramolecular, intraprotein shuttling of these substrates. So citrulline is a byproduct of nitric oxide. It's caught up in the urea cycle, makes arginine. Arginine is shuttled back through the eNOS. You get nitric oxide. Citrulline is a byproduct. So you get this really nice intramolecular shuttling that basically takes care of itself. You need no flux of L-arginine through into the cell to make nitric oxide.
So there are people out there selling citrulline supplements. What do you think about that? What are we affecting with that in a nutshell?
Probably nothing.
Okay.
I mean, it's an amino acid. And you get amino acids from eating protein-rich foods, if you have stomach acid. So again, there's very few people who have an L-citrulline deficiency. There's only one condition, medical condition, where you get an arginine deficiency, and it's a urea cycle disorder, an inborn error metabolism called arginosuccinic aciduria. It's a very rare orphan disease, but these kids are born with it. They develop urea cycle problems and a host of other symptoms like resistant hypertension, heart disease, renal disease, neurological dysfunction. And all of this, and we published this in Nature Medicine, it's a nitric oxide problem.
Okay.
Even though you supplement these kids with 20 or 30 grams of L-arginine per day, they can't utilize it to make nitric oxide because the enzyme is dysfunctional. And they don't have that enzyme, that the protein that tethers eNOS to the membrane. So that you can't utilize arginine.
What about kids who have pandas? Have you seen anything with that, with nitric oxide or not? I've heard about that. I don't know anything about that. Or I'm not sure there's anything about that out there.
Yeah, that's new to me. I mean, there's probably not anything to it. We know how the body makes nitric oxide. I don't know what role pandas play in that, but
I'm not saying it does. I'm just asking the question. It was something a colleague had asked me about a few months ago. How can we up our nitric oxide content? We're just going to recap several of the things we've been over. We've got to make it all the time. So what's our best bet?
That's right. It goes back to these fundamental principles I mentioned earlier. You've got to give the body what it needs to make nitric oxide, and you've got to stop doing things that are inhibiting it. So you need to eat more green leafy vegetables. It's not just the nitrate content. You get a lot of fiber, vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin E, a lot of other nutrients and vitamins from green leafy vegetables. So you've got to change your diet. You've got to get up and exercise. You've got to stimulate endogenous nitric oxide production. If you're using mouthwash, you have to stop.
Yeah.
If you're using antacids, you have to stop. If you have a runny nose, don't run off to your physician and get an antibiotic.
Yes.
Let the body fight itself. And so get out of the body's way. Let it do its job. But for those that don't want to do that, then there's product technology out there to fix that. And, I'm not here to promote product, but the number one question I get all the time is how do you find a product that you can be confident that's going to help your body generate nitric oxide?
Which are the ones that work and which ones really don't?
Yeah, and so without promoting my own product technology, that's not what I'm here, but I think it's important for people to understand. So number one, you got to look for patents. If there's no patent on a product, that means that there's no innovation. There's nothing new or different about it. It's probably just arginine, citrulline, and a lot of amino acids. And you can't patent natural products. So patents are important. If a product has a patent on it, it means that they've done something a little bit different than anything else on the market. So that's number one. Number two, are there any clinical trials on that product? Because if a product actually generates nitric oxide or improves the body's ability to generate nitric oxide, you should be able to demonstrate that in a randomized controlled clinical trial, because nitric oxide is so important, affects a number of different pathways and things that affect health, that there should be published clinical trials on that technology.
Yes.
And then number 3 is the company or the person that formulated or developed that product, have they ever published anything in the nitric oxide field? All of a sudden, where you got a lot of these nitric oxide experts. I'm on PubMed and Medline, and if they've never published in the nitric oxide space, this is complex chemistry and biochemistry. And if you've never published a paper on nitric oxide biochemistry or physiology, how in the hell can you develop a product that's going to generate nitric oxide?
That's a good
So if you
question.
look at those 3 things, are there patents, are there published clinical trials, and is the person behind that product or technology published in the nitric oxide field? And if you can answer yes to those 3 questions, then the product probably works.
Okay.
And then getting back to your question before, who needs nitric oxide? And you mentioned ED. I talk about heart attack and stroke, and people really don't give a damn about that. But when you start talking about sexual dysfunction, ears perk up and people become interested all of a sudden.
I was talking to my staff about actually ED. This is maybe to me it was a funny thing. So one of my staff members has a new boyfriend, and when she heard it might be connected to ED, the next day she came in and she's like, "I just want you to know, I went and got some of those products out there for nitric oxide because I was very concerned." So.
Yeah, well, I mean, physiologically, it makes perfect sense. So, it's not just men, it's women. In order for men or women to get an erection, you have to have an increase in blood flow, both to the penis and the clitoris. And you can only get an increase in blood flow through the production of nitric oxide that then dilates the blood vessel to allow more blood into that organ. And if you can't make nitric oxide, you can't dilate the blood vessels, you cannot get engorgement, and you cannot get an erection, and women become anorgasmic. So if you have nitric oxide deficiency in the cells that line the blood vessels of the sex organs, you have endothelial dysfunction and nitric oxide deficiency in your coronary arteries, in your cerebral arteries, in every artery throughout the body. So if you have sexual dysfunction, that's really it's what we call the canary in the coal mine.
Yeah.
It's the first sign and symptom that you've got a nitric oxide problem. And if you don't fix it, you're on a road to heart attack and stroke. And here's the statistics. 50% of the men over the age of 40 report erectile dysfunction. And most men will not self-report. So I think these numbers are way, way low. These are the ones that are self-reported. I think it's probably 60, 70, maybe 80% have some degree of erectile dysfunction. And that's the reason heart attack and stroke, cardiovascular disease is the number 1 killer. And it's unacceptable because all you have to do is fix nitric oxide production.
So instead of taking Viagra or just Viagra, you could up your nitric oxide and not only help your relationship with your partner, but hopefully not develop heart disease and stroke.
Yeah, that's right. And here's the statistics on Viagra. Very successful, multi-billion-dollar drug, but it only works in 45% of the men in which it's prescribed.
Very interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah.
So the non-responders are not. So people have a misconception that Viagra works. It's a nitric oxide drug. It's not a nitric oxide drug. It works downstream of nitric oxide. But if your body can't make nitric oxide, if the cells that line the blood vessels of the corpus cavernosum and the penis can't make nitric oxide, then Viagra does not work. It cannot work because of the second messenger is not there to prevent its degradation. So how do you turn non-responders into responders? You improve their nitric oxide production. And that's very important clinically because there's a lot of side effects with these types of drug therapies. So if you improve nitric oxide, you can actually lower the dose of the PD5 inhibitors, or you can get people completely off of them. And so if you give the body what it needs, there's no need for supplements. There's no need for drug therapy.
Right.
Because the body basically does what it's supposed to do.
The body generally wants to heal itself. At least I believe so.
That's right. You got to get out of the way, though.
Yep. If there was something, if I'm not putting you on the spot too much, what would you like to tell the dental industry?
Well, the dentist, are probably, they can be your best friend or your worst enemy. Because I think the dentists probably have the biggest impact in public health of any healthcare practitioner in America, in the world. So, one, you have to clean up oral infections, and I think, because that's directly tied to nitric oxide production, and it's directly tied to cardiovascular disease. So you have to get rid of oral infections. Root canals is probably a completely different subject matter, but root canals are infected. It causes disruption in nitric oxide production. I think we have to do a better job of maintaining oral health, and just blanket antiseptic mouthwash for periodontal disease or gingivitis is not the answer. You have to restore the oral microbiome. It's always a balance between good and bad, good and evil, right?
Yes.
And so the antiseptic mouthwashes basically wipe out everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I think we have to do a better job of maintaining some balance in the oral microbiome. And once you do that and maintain homeostasis, it begins in the mouth. And what we're finding is that you can simply change your diet. So everybody's focused on the gut microbiome and how diet changes the gut microbiome. We know that the diet changes the oral microflora as well. So for dentists, probably 20% of my lectures are at dental conferences, because I try to reach a lot of dentists to get them to think about what they're doing. That's the problem with disciplinary medicine. Most dentists only focus on the mouth and forget that the mouth is connected to the other parts of the body.
Yes.
Same thing with cardiologists. They forget that the heart's connected to everything else. They just want to treat the heart. So you have to fix the body talks to other parts of the body. And so part of that cellular communication is nitric oxide. And if you're disrupting nitric oxide, you get a breakdown in cellular communication and bad things happen.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We just have really a couple of minutes left. Do you want to talk about some of the upcoming research you see maybe happening with respect to nitric oxide, or maybe there's some parts we haven't touched on as we conclude?
Yeah, I think really the field for the past 30 or 40 years has focused on, this enzyme nitric oxide synthase that converts arginine to nitric oxide. That enzymology and biochemistry is very well characterized and elucidated. I think the future is the microbiome. I think we started in the mouth. We'll work our way down through the GI tract. But what we're finding is that the oral microbiome is probably the most important. It provides 50% of your total body nitric oxide availability. So understanding hygiene practices, dietary factors, and things that can restore a healthy microbiome that can utilize nitrate to generate nitric oxide is very ripe for research. In fact, there's a number of important studies coming out now. So now I think, so what does this mean clinically? Is there going to be a product that you can regenerate a probiotic or prebiotic? I filed a number of patents on this. Will we develop a product? Maybe. Maybe we don't need a product. Maybe you just change your diet. What we're finding is if you give these bugs more nitrate to respire on, they'll basically regenerate and repopulate themselves. So maybe nitrate is a prebiotic.
Oh, interesting.
So I think that's the microbiome is the future. Regenerative medicine is the future. I speak at a lot of stem cell conferences. If you lose the ability to generate nitric oxide, you lose your ability to mobilize your own stem cells. But yet a lot of people are paying for, $10, $20, $30,000 for stem cell therapy, but they're basically taking sick cells from a sick patient and putting them back in a sick patient.
Oh, wow.
That doesn't make sense to me. So we focused on restoring the function of those cells by restoring the functionality of nitric oxide. So if patients are getting stem cell therapy, if you restore nitric oxide prior to the deployment of the stem cells, then the stem cells actually perform better. You get better healing effects of that because they know where to go, they know what to become, and the body's ability to heal improves.
Have you seen people, we have maybe like 1 minute, have you seen people improve wherever they are when they start supplementing with nitric oxide or increasing their nitric oxide abilities? They can always turn the clock back a little bit, can't they?
Yeah, they can. One of the most gratifying things that I do is I get dozens of emails and phone calls every day, every week, on people that, we've changed their lives. We've, gotten them off blood pressure medicine. Countless testimonies, and there's nothing more rewarding than to hear you've changed someone's life. And so if you've changed the life of a person, you've changed the world, and you've certainly changed their world. And so that's been my mission. It's too important a molecule for people not to understand and appreciate.
It is. Dr. Nathan Bryan, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on and speaking to me tonight about nitric oxide. If anyone out there would like to share his videos or learn more about nitric oxide, please visit Dr. Nathan Bryan at www.drnathansbryan.com. And I hope you have a wonderful evening and a good time, and teach a lot of people at A4M, the conference this weekend in Florida. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. My honor.
Yay. All right.